My name is Riley Morgan, and I never expected the past to come find me after I'd buried it so carefully. I served my country, followed every rule, held myself together with discipline and silence. But everything changed the morning I stepped into a general's office and saw a photograph on his desk. A little girl with the same eyes as the friend I grew up with in an orphanage, a friend I lost and never stopped missing. And in that instant, I realized the truth. She hadn't disappeared by accident. Someone took her. Some truths arrive quietly, like a photograph that stops your breath. The office was colder than I expected. Morning light filtered through the blinds in narrow, disciplined stripes, touching every polished surface without softening any of them. I stood near the door, spine straight, hands behind my back, reciting protocol to myself, as if routine could steady the ground under my feet. I had inspected dozens of command offices before. None of them felt like this one. None of them held the weight of a life I once knew. General Everett Hale didn't look at me at first. He stood behind his desk, head lowered, reading a document with the kind of stillness that suggested he was holding something together by force of will alone. The silence was not empty. It was compressed, heavy enough to feel in the ribs. I told myself to breathe, to be the officer, to be clean, efficient, neutral. But then I saw it. A frame placed just off-center on his desk, not facing outward proudly the way generals usually displayed their families. It was angled inward, as though the image was meant to be looked at privately, not shown to the world. A little girl, no older than 6, soft brown hair, blue-gray eyes the exact color of winter light. My lungs stalled. The floor tilted. Those eyes had once looked at me through dusty sunlight on an orphanage window. I remembered how we had drawn shapes into the haze on the glass with the tips of our fingers. Airplanes, always airplanes, because we wanted to believe there was somewhere else we could fly to. Somewhere where promises were not broken by adults disappearing or systems forgetting us. "If we ever get separated," she had whispered, cheek pressed to the glass beside mine, "we find each other again." I had nodded. I had believed her. I had asked her to believe me back. My fingers slipped. The inspection folder fell, papers scattering like startled wings across the floor. General Hale looked up sharply. "Major Morgan?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed around something that felt 14 years old and bruised by time. He followed my gaze to the photograph. For a moment, he said nothing. His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with something raw and carefully buried. "You recognize her," he said. Not a question. I forced my mouth to move. "Yes, sir, I knew her. We grew up together." His posture broke. Not all at once, but like a man stepping onto ice and realizing too late it will not hold. "You mean?" His voice softened into something frail. "My daughter was alive?" Alive. Had been. Taken. Lost. Erased. All the words crowded at once, but none made it past my lips. I had promised to find her again. I had failed once. I would not fail twice. Justice doesn't hide in shadows. But the things that bury it do. The drive to Waco felt shorter than it had any right to. Maybe because every mile scraped at a memory I'd kept sealed. Girls whispering in bunk beds, the smell of floor wax, my own small hands tracing airplanes in dusty glass. At St. Mary's, the bricks were duller, the sign more tired, the air inside still and careful, as if the building remembered how to keep secrets. When I signed the visitor log, my name looked like an intrusion. Sister Marianne found me in the corridor by the chapel. Time had laid fine lines around her eyes, but the gentleness I remembered was intact. She said my name once, softly, and I almost answered with the child's voice I'd left here. We sat on a wooden bench where I used to wait for donated shoes. She folded her hands and waited for me to start, but I couldn't. The photograph in Hale's office spoke for me. "I thought you might come back someday," she said. "Some adults lie to protect themselves. Remember what we taught you?" The words weren't a scold, just a lantern lit for a dark hallway. I told her about the blue-gray eyes in the silver frame, about the name that used to be Lydia's shadow. Her face changed, recognition, then grief. Marianne led me to the records room, metal cabinets, mislabeled boxes, a fan that pushed warm air nowhere useful. She unlocked a drawer, slid out a thin folder. Vaccination slips, a school placement form, then a gap where a life should be. She was transferred, Marianne said, the word brittle. Men with badges, not ours. We were told it was emergency placement, no follow-up, no return address. She looked at me with an apology no one deserved to carry. I asked questions. Doors closed. The halls felt narrower on the way out, as if the building were shrinking to keep what little remained. By the time I reached Fort Hood, resolve had calcified into a plan. Find the paper that men believed could stay buried. The archive room hummed like a hive. Rows of servers blinked their indifferent green. I logged in with credentials that had never failed me and searched for the obvious: relocation orders, emergency programs, special transfers. The system paused, as if considering my worthiness, then bled red across the screen. Access violation. This action will be reported. The message was clinical, almost polite, but it landed like a hammer. A door, and on the other side of it, someone who preferred darkness. I backed out, cleared logs, rinsed the console with the habits I'd learned on harder nights in less forgiving places. Captain Reed was waiting in the hallway, shoulders squared, voice low enough for the machinery to swallow. "Drop this, Riley. You don't have clearance to chase ghosts." He wasn't threatening me. He was insulating himself. I understood the difference, and I hated that I did. "Is that an order, sir?" "It's a reminder." He held my gaze just a second too long. "Pick your enemies wisely." I walked out before my knees could betray me. Heat pooled under the Texas sky, and I felt suddenly, absurdly cold. This wasn't just a father's grief with a paper trail. This was a machine that ate paper and called it procedure. A machine built by people who believed consequences were for other people. In my quarters, I locked the door, set my phone face down, and let the silence press in until it thinned. Marianne's voice surfaced. "Some adults lie to shelter themselves. At St. Mary's, it had meant bruised truths and small cruelties. Here, it meant signatures." When I finally flipped the phone, a new email sat alone in my inbox. No subject line, no sender name I recognized. I opened it and felt the world tilt by 1 degree. "You're looking for the wrong file. Find the man who signed the transfer. M." Some doors don't open when you knock. They open when guilt breaks first. The anonymous message from last night still burned on my screen. Find the man who signed the transfer. I drove to suburban Georgetown with the kind of steadiness you fake when your stomach won't stop twisting. The street was too quiet. Lawns clipped so short they looked shaved. Wind moved the flag on a porch and then went still, as if the neighborhood were holding its breath. He opened the door before I could knock twice. Colonel Marcus Matthews, older, narrower, the kind of thin that grief carves. His eyes recognized my uniform first, then my face. A flicker, gone. "Whatever you're selling, Major, I'm not buying." "I'm not selling," I said. "I'm asking about a transfer order you signed." The screen door stayed between us like a second rank of guards. His jaw tightened. "I don't remember. You should leave." "I have the case number." I said, "Leave." The door clicked. The latch sounded like a verdict. I walked back to the curb with my pulse pounding in my ears, hands steady until they suddenly weren't. In the car, I braced my forearms on the wheel and watched the sunlight flatten across his blinds. For a minute, 2, maybe more, I let the old orphanage voice in my head whisper that this was how it always ended. With doors, and locks, and adults who decided truth was an inconvenience. I called General Hale. He answered on the second ring, breath rough as gravel. I told him everything in one exhale: the refusal, the shut door, the dead air. He listened without interrupting. When I ran out of words, he gave me only 6. "If we stop now, they win twice." It wasn't a lecture. It was a benediction. I sat there until the sun tipped to amber and shadows grew long enough to touch the street. My phone rang after dark. Same number, same house, different man. His voice was smaller, stripped of parade ground steel. Major Morgan, come back. The porch light painted him in tired gold. He opened the real door this time. No screens, no distance. The living room smelled like lemon polish and old smoke. He didn't offer me a seat. He didn't sit. I signed it, he said, staring at a spot on the wall no wider than a coin. And I regret it every day. Silence swallowed the room. The HVAC hummed. Somewhere a clock ticked toward judgment. Who ordered it? I asked. He rubbed his brow with the heel of his hand. You don't want that name yet. I do. He shook his head, reached beneath a stack of forgotten mail, and produced a scuffed keycard. Government gray, edge chipped, a strip of tape labeled in cramped block letters. Houston, Federal Storage. One-time access, old clearance. If it still works, there's a box you're looking for. Which box? 47C. He swallowed. She was never supposed to disappear. Someone erased her. The last word fell like a body. He finally met my eyes, and I saw it there. The thing that breaks a soldier when the shooting stops. Not fear, not anger. Guilt, stubborn as rust. Why tell me now? I asked. Because you knocked, he said, voice scarcely more than breath. And I heard her name in it. Outside, the night had cooled. The keycard lay warm in my palm, as if it had been waiting for this hand, this hour. I stepped off the porch, the boards creaking like confession, and slipped the card into my pocket, where I could feel its weight against my heartbeat. One chance. One door. One truth. Truth is not loud. Truth is a blade placed gently, where it cuts the deepest. 9 o'clock. The hearing room breathed cold air and fluorescent light. Rows of faces, cameras like unblinking eyes, the seal glinting above the dais. I sat straight, palms dry on the folder that had followed me from Fort Hood to Houston to here. Box 47C distilled into numbered tabs and quiet certainty. For one heartbeat, I saw glass and dust instead. 2 children tracing wings on a window they could not open. Our airplanes had never taken off. Today, they would. I rose when called. Major Riley Morgan. My voice surprised me. Steady, low, without apology. I walked to the microphone and placed the first document beneath the projector. The relocation index. Case ID 217L. St. Mary's intake. Transfer notation. No receiving agency recorded. Tab 2. The FEMA crossover sheet stamped HVTXOPS. Tab 3. The Matthews Directive, his signature tight as a held breath. I spoke in short steps, dates, places, custodial gaps, letting silence do the heavy lifting between each fact. Every pause felt like the click of a lock giving way. On the far side, Secretary Harold Voss watched with courtroom polish. Jaw composed, tie perfect, eyes that scanned for angles instead of answers. When the chair recognized him, he leaned forward and smoothed the record with a sentence I had already rehearsed hearing. These measures, he said, were undertaken under national security protocol during an extraordinary period. Fragmentary paperwork is regrettable, but not unusual. Murmurs. The chair turned back to me. I advanced one more page. Matthews's memo bearing a dead seal revived for a single act. I stepped closer to the microphone until it caught my breath and gave it shape. Secretary Voss, I said, if she was a threat, why erase her? The room did not move. On the screen, the red authorization line might as well have been a scar. Voss blinked once, then folded his hands. Classification constraints limit what I can. No classification authorizes unpersoning a child, I said. Not loud, just placed where it would cut. The chair called the next witness. The doors opened without ceremony. She entered in a simple blouse and hospital flats, hair pulled back, eyes the color of a sky after rain. The cameras forgot themselves. General Everett Hale did not look at the press or the senators. He looked at his daughter and held still, as if the room might break. She took the oath with a voice that trembled only on the first syllable. I stepped aside. She reached the microphone, set both hands upon the wood, and breathed. I remembered those same hands, smaller once, fogging a window while we sketched fuselages and hope. She glanced at her father. He nodded, a soldier learning how to be only a father again. My name is Lydia Hale, and I was never meant to disappear. No cheers, no gavel slam. The collapse of a story told too long sounded like paper losing its lies. Voss's pen stalled. The senators leaned in as if meaning were something you could listen harder to hear. Lydia described nightmares and gaps. The adoptive years that were real and kind. The men in uniforms from a life that had been taken without her consent and then taken again by the eraser. When she finished, the chair asked Voss to respond. He smiled the smile of a man who had always owned the room. Today the room did not return the favor. Operational judgments, he said, are complex. General Hale rose only halfway, grief harnessed as discipline. Complex, he said, is not the word. I gathered the copies, each page a rung on the ladder we had climbed out of silence. At the table, Voss finally looked at me, calculation draining into something smaller. You don't know what you've started. No. I finished what you tried to hide. Not every victory is loud. Some arrive in the quiet, where grief and healing share the same breath. Sunset put a soft gold on the water in Lake Charles, and the breeze pushed small ripples toward the dock like a heartbeat remembering its rhythm. I stayed a few steps back while Everett Hale and Lydia sat side by side on the bench. No speeches, no apologies rehearsed for a courtroom, just two people learning how to share air again. He asked about the clinic. She asked if the old piano in his house still made the low keys ring. Between their questions fell pockets of silence that didn't feel empty. They felt like stitches. I found myself breathing with them. For months, my lungs had known only the sprint of pursuit. Now they practiced the art of staying. A fisherman's radio murmured on the far shore. The flag by the clinic door lifted and settled, as if the world itself were exhaling. Later, when Hale walked to the truck for coffee, Lydia and I remained at the rail, watching light comb through the cypress. Some memories don't come back, she said, voice steady, eyes clear on the lake. But the feelings do. I met her gaze. You don't need to remember to belong. Something eased in her shoulders, an invisible weight set down where the water could carry it away. A week later, we drove to Waco. St. Mary's stood smaller than the storms it had survived. Sister Marianne met us at the steps, with a smile that trembled at the edges, and then held firm. She brought us to the chapel window, the same old glass, dust gathered in the corners, the light coming through in soft color. We didn't speak. Lydia reached up and pressed her fingertip to the pane, tracing the curve of a wing the way a child once had when the future still felt like blue chalk and clear sky. She stopped halfway, palm flat, breathing. I lifted my hand and drew the other half, straight line, tail, the small lift that makes flight possible. The shape closed. A promise closed with it. I'm home, she whispered. Hale laid his palm beside ours on the glass, 3 prints haloed by stained light. Outside, a breeze stirred the oak leaves and sent shifting patches of brightness across the chapel floor, like blessings learning where to land. I stepped back, watching them. I thought this story was about finding her, but it was also about finding me again. There were moments in this journey when I almost gave up, when the weight of silence and unanswered questions felt heavier than any battlefield I'd ever crossed. If my story reached you, if something in it stirred you, I ask you to stand with me now. Tell me what you think I did right or wrong. Tell me what this brought up in your heart, because healing doesn't happen alone. And here is what I learned. When life tries to convince you to let go, hold on a little longer. Truth may come late, but it does come, and it changes everything.